Okay, let's pick up. Actually, I want to take just a couple comments on two things that were said last class. Actually, one from last semester. I don't want to go back last semester. We had a great series on the Langer dispute, but I have to call your attention to this. If you go online, you can, or you get it, this Jewish Action, the summer 2025 issue. We spoke a good deal about Rabbi Soloveitchik's attitude. There's a letter from Jacob Sasson. I don't think related to the Jacob Sasson who's listening. You get confusing between the two, in which he cites from a passage from the Rav, a speech from the Rav, in which the Rav seems to say that he seems to identify with the opposition to Rav Goren, and Rabbi Rakefet replies to this, saying, no, it's not true. I have to say that when I read the letter of Jacob Sasson, it does seem pretty compelling. But Rabbi Rakefet was on the scene, and as he said, he's the one who publicized the speech of the Rav, and he thinks the Rav was just talking in generalities. So if we were still dealing with the Goren, the Langer dispute, I would go into that in more detail, but that's in the past now. The one thing I do want to comment before we begin is I said last class that I don't exactly remember my lashon, my language. I believe I said that Yeshivas Keren B'Yavna was not the first Hesder yeshiva, that Yeshivas Hadarom was first. And of course, people, I don't want to insult Keren B'Yavna. People wrote to me, how can I say that? Everyone knows Keren B'Yavna is the first. In fact, if you look at Wikipedia, which I find is generally accurate, it says it begins its entry that it's Yeshivat Hesder Rishonah. It's the first Hesder yeshiva. So let me explain to you why I said what I said. And I don't actually think there's a contradiction, although maybe my language could have been more careful. If you look in Hamayan, the Hamayan in Tammuz, Tafshin Samachtet, there's an article by Rav Yoel Amital. That's the son of Rav Amital. And Rav Amital was alive at this time. And he writes about his grandfather, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Meltzer. And he tells the whole story. And obviously, Rav Amital himself would have read this. He tells the whole story of where the Hesder idea came from. The idea, for those who know Hesder is yeshiva students also being in the army. It's a program. So you do a few months army, a few months learning, back and forth. In the end, you don't learn, you're not in the army the full service. Because whatever it is, I don't know in the end how much it is, but at least when I was in Israel, it wasn't the 3 years. In those days, it was 5 years, so it was less. And now it's the service is less, it's even less. And there have been people who are not happy with this, who feel that they should do full service and they go to the mechinas. But he discusses that Rav Amital and his father-in-law, Rav Tzvi Meltzer, came up with the idea of Hesder, and then they tell about Yeshivas Hadarom. Yeshivas Hadarom was a yeshiva, religious Zionist yeshiva, which was adopted by the RCA, like in the 60s. I don't know if it's a yeshiva today or more of just a high school. And they talk here how, as part of the yeshiva, they established a teacher's seminary. Today it still exists. It says it's called Moreshet Yaakov. And they received, and this teacher seminary is part of the yeshiva. And they received from the government an ishur, a certification from the Misrad HaChinuch, from the education ministry, that from the government, that for the seminary, the teacher seminary, those students, and remember, the teacher seminary is part of the yeshiva, but it's a separate thing. They joined Hesder. They were the first ones, Hayu Harishonim, who were in Hesder. And later, you have Keren B'Yavna and others. So, yes, what I say is correct, that the first people to do Hesder were from Yeshivas Hadarom. However, I should have to clarify, maybe I wasn't exact in my words. We are not dealing with a yeshiva per se here, an entire yeshiva. We're dealing with part of a yeshiva and not even the yeshiva section. We're dealing with the teacher seminary of the yeshiva. So if you're talking about a whole yeshiva, which is involved in Hesder, that would be Keren B'Yavna. So If I insulted Yeshivas Keren B'Yavneh, I take that back. But let me say one other thing about Keren B'Yavneh and Hesder, because I saw it was pointed out in this book. I mentioned it last week. To be holy but human. Reflections upon my Rebbe, Rav Yehuma Amital by Rabbi Moshe Tarragon, who I know is in America this Shabbos because I saw an ad for somewhere he was speaking. Now, it turns out that the first third of this book is his own ideas, or maybe the first half, and the second half, or even more than half, is taken from the book I showed you last week. It's his elaborations on the book from Rav Amital, Torah Shabbal Peh. But if you read Hebrew, you should read the Torah Shabbal Peh, the original thing, because I already saw that he sort of softens some passages. I think it's best to see Rav Amital, his words, without any explaining. But in this book, on page 99, he makes a good point. I think we probably have graduates here or people who studied in Keren B'Yavneh. I hope you will not be offended by what I tell you now, because it is the absolute truth, and we all know this. You must know it also. If you knew who Rav Goldvicht was, I mean, he hasn't been around for a while, but what even though Keren B'Yavneh was the first Hesder yeshiva, Tarragon points out correctly that before Gush, namely Keren B'Yavneh, and there might have been another one or two, these were all, as he says it here, Hesder b'diavad, something that was acceptable but not ideal. It wasn't meant to represent a larger society model, but Hesder was different. It was Hesder l'chatchila. Keren B'Yavneh was opened up. In fact, the Chazon Ish sent Rav Goldvich, who was a Haredi rabbi. He sent him to, he agreed with him that this would be a good idea, that he could work with the, I don't really know, really he was, I mean, the Chazon Ish died before the Hesder program, but the Chazon Ish was the one who sent him to be teaching in, hold on a second, I'll give you the exact year, teaching in Keren B'Yavneh. See, Keren B'Yavneh was established in 1953 for religious Zionist people, for Bnei Akiva types. And that's the Chazon Ish was still alive when they were planning this. And he told Rav Goldvich that we have to bring some Torah to the religious Zionists. So Rav Goldvich went there to teach, but he never regarded himself as a religious Zionist figure. He was teaching Torah, just like we have Haredi Mukam in our schools in America, at least, and almost every modern Orthodox school in America, you have Haredi teachers. And then when it became a Hesder yeshiva, again, this was the best thing for Rabbi Goldvich would be if you left Keren B'Yavneh and went to what they called Yeshiva Gedola. So you went to Yeshiva Gedola and went to the Mir or Ponevej or places like that. That would be the best thing. But as long as you're not going to do that, okay, we'll give you the next best thing. We'll give you Hesder. Right? So instead of just going to the army, you also have yeshiva learning. So that's a b'diavad. Gush, Rav Amital's understanding, and also Rav Lichtenstein. And by the way, Rav Lichtenstein, if you look Rav Lichtenstein, his defense of Hesder, it has nothing to do with what you hear today about, it's a melchemes, a mitzvah, and all these things. No, he said simply just the moral aspect, that how can you live in a society and not be part of its defense? He used the term chesed. He says we're part of the society. We have a role also. He called it chesed. What it means is carrying your load, which today you do hear a lot of people say, but before this recent war, people would speak not in terms of carrying the load, but in terms of it's a mechamis mitzvah, and the mechamis mitzvah, everyone has to fight. Rav Lichtenstein didn't go there, and he has the famous article, The Ideology of Hesder. And Rav Amital also, the idea is, this is the way you should be. Not that this is second best. This is the way you should be. It's the Haredi approach, which is not the way you should be. And for a long time, it was very theoretical, but now it's very practical. And if you know what's going on in Israel, the students of the Hesder yeshivas, and in general, the religious Zionists, have suffered more than their percentage-wise share of losses. And it's creating, of course, an untenable situation. The terrorist attack last week, the people who killed them was a soldier, Haredi soldier, and another Haredi with a gun. So hopefully that world is coming to see that you can't have a situation, especially when your population has become so big, where you don't take part in basic defense. I'll just say one other thing about Rav Lichtenstein. I, it's not he really differs from the other religious Zionists. When he went on, why did he go on Aliyah? So everyone he speaks, he go on Aliyah to fulfill mitzvah Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. All these other reasons. Rav Lichtenstein said he didn't go with Israel because he felt it was a mitzvah. He had to go there. I'm sure he felt it wasn't a chiyuv because in his family it's a good thing, but it's not an obligation. And he said he didn't go because of the Ramban or because Midrashim speak about how special the land of Israel is. He said he went to Eretz Yisrael because he wanted to be together with the Jewish people, where the Jewish people were being reborn, and that's the center of Jewish life. That's where he went. That's why he went. And um, I find that interesting. Okay, we're out up to now chapter 2 in the book. We did chapter 1 last week. I think we'll do chapter 2 and 3. And the title of the chapter is, you got to come up with these provocative titles, but they're not needlessly provocative. The titles actually portray the essence of the chapter. But if you don't read the chapter and just see the title, then you think, well, what are these titles? It's I think the expression today is clickbait. It's not. The title is halacha always essential? Okay, so before reading it, obviously halacha is essential. That's like the basis of traditional Judaism. But so let's see what I mean by now. Now, in chapter 1, I spoke about the study of Talmud and halacha, and we saw that Rav Kook, he couldn't be fenced in, just a Talmud-only curriculum. He needed breadth. He needed to connect to God in different ways through study, through personal connections, etc. We saw that. We don't need to go over it. But in this chapter, we see that what I call his radical theological musings move beyond the study of halacha and move to the actual observance of it. He says something which is shocking when you think of it. He says that not only are the mitzvos not a benefit for everyone, but there's some tzaddikim to whom the mitzvos can damage them, I guess, in a spiritual way. Now, what does this mean? How can mitzvos not be a benefit or even damage some people? Now, on this passage, the note to this passage, the editors point to I'll just tell you where the passage is for those who want to check it. Well, if you have my my book, well, it's Pinkasei Rav Kook, Pinkasei Riyah. They point to the Rambam, a famous passage in the Rambam in the Guide, book 3, chapter 34. What does the Rambam say? The Rambam says as follows. Let me read you a little bit of it. The Rambam says, one of the things you ought to know is that the Torah, the law of the Torah, doesn't pay attention to the isolated. It wasn't given with a view to things that are rare. Rather, it's for the harov, the majority. And the Rambam explains, don't wonder at the fact that the purpose of the Torah is not perfectly achieved in every individual case. In other words, the Torah is a system of life, the best possible system. You could take our marriages. Rav David C. Hoffman says, you look at the medieval period and you look what Jewish marriages were compared to what was going on there. Look around. We have, in so many ways, it creates such wonderful communities and families, and yet, together with these great things, there's problems that come up. The whole Aguna issue. There's always going to be you're stranded. You miss your plane and you're stuck in Albuquerque and you can't get any real kosher food other than junk food in the little store. So there's an example of where the halacha doesn't work for you. I was once in a situation. I was in Germany and I couldn't be somewhere for Shabbos. I was stuck the whole Shabbos. I was at this place, and you're stuck with no shul, no food. I had my own food, but I'm just stuck there. That's not the way you're supposed to live. So you could say, well, get in a car and drive because you're not. But the point is, you can't do that. You're not supposed to be by yourself on Shabbos. And then really, you're supposed to be with everyone else, and that's Shabbos. But you can't have a situation where you're going to say, well, be with other people and observe it. But if you can't be with them, then you can drive to go there. No, the system is you have to observe Shabbos. And sometimes it doesn't work. But that the Rambam says that just happens. It's built into the system. Any system, sometimes people are going to be put in a difficult situation, but that's just the system. And that's how they explain what the Rambam's referring to when it says the mitzvot are not always going to be a benefit. And however, I don't think that's what the Rav Kook is referring to. Remember, he says that there are those for whom the mitzvot are not a benefit. It doesn't sound like he's speaking of a particular mitzvah, but he's speaking about the mitzvah, the system as a whole. Furthermore, he says that for some tzaddikim, the mitzvos are even going to be damaging, not just not a benefit, but damaging. He says, Yesh tzaddikim shamitzvot olu lahem mazikot. So what it appears to me that what Rav Kook is speaking about are those tzaddikim who feel that they cannot be bound by a system of law. Their spirit desires to soar the heavens. Take someone, for instance, who is so spiritual, he can't be told that you have to daven at this time between 6 a.m. and 9:30. He's connected to God all the time. The idea that you command him, you have to daven, and we're not getting into the Hasidim, who, in a minute here, well, you can walk into Borough Park at 11 o'clock on a Sunday or 12 o'clock even and find Shachris Minyanim. That's a different issue. Leave that aside. But for those who are strict in all matters of halacha and why the Hasidim, who are generally strict in this matter, they're not strict, this is a reflection of what I'm telling you right now. But you can imagine a situation where, the tzaddik, the great individual, he feels like this is damaging to him. He has to pray right now, but he's not ready to pray now. He hasn't yet developed. He hasn't yet done the things he needs to do before davening. Most of us, we just get up and we daven. But the great tzaddik can only daven when he's prepared to daven. So for certain individuals, it can be damaging. And you can come up with all sorts of other things. They say that things that they have to, halachas that we have to do, but are going to be damaging. I'll give you another one, maybe. I'm not going to say, but I listened. We're coming Rosh Hashanah, obviously, so chazonos is a big thing, and in it's basically become unacceptable today to have repetition, chazanim repeating words. We've spoken a lot about repeating words, but if you listened, I was in the car driving yesterday, so I listened to the podcast, the Halacha Headlines podcast, this Rabbi Ari Wasserman. So he interviewed three very learned and good rabbis, one of whom actually listens to the classes, about different halakhic issues of chazanos and balancing it. And he asked all of them about repeating words. And in a very centrist Orthodox fashion, of course, you can't repeat words, it's usser, it's this and that, and very nitty-gritty halacha, which all I would say is that we know that in Europe they did repeat words, and the Aruch HaShulchan is Mo'am Mitzchus, and Ramosha thought that some repeating is okay. I believe the second rabbi, Rabbi Leff, didn't have a problem with in Aleinu, repeating words. It's not a hefsek, bayomahu, but even today people don't want to. But I do take, when Rabbi Leff said that in explaining why repeating words is so problematic, he said, would you go before the king and say to him, king, 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 10 times? No, you speak. To which I would only say, but if you went before the king, you wouldn't sing either. You forget repeating words. Who ever heard of going before a king or a president and breaking out in song? So I don't know if the analogy is good, but look, the poskim have, Rav Soloveitchik was very opposed to repeating words. Okay. And then you have, right at the end of the show, so he has a chazan, a big chazan. He's the chazan of the Yeshurun synagogue in Jerusalem. I looked him up. He's one of the most important chazanim. And Rabbi Wasserman says, we're getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. Give us something that really inspires you. So what does he do? He picks something from the Eilah, You got to listen to this. Not only does he repeat once, twice, three, it's like 10 times he's repeating again and again and again the same passage. So what are you going to, so what are you, here you have the spirit. He's a spiritual person, this Chazan, and that's, we had in my show a very pious rabbi who was our Chazan. And he repeated words. And I remember when I first learned you're not supposed to do that, I asked him. He was a Muslim from Sabatka and Eretz Yisrael. I said, repeating words. And then he just said to me that when I repeat words, it's not destroying the kavana. It's not. So in other words, and he was a Talmud Chacham. His answer was that I'm not interested in the nitty gritty. I'm telling you what I'm doing is okay because it's part of the overall tefillah, and I'm not. We're not destroying any of the lashon or anything. So I thought of that yesterday in the car when I heard this because it's the same idea. You're gonna tell a chazan. I'm not talking about a performer type of chazan. I'm talking about someone who's really into it spiritually. You're gonna tell him that he can't repeat a word. It's coming from his soul. He's saying, Shema, Kolenu, Shema, Kolenu. It's coming from inside him. And but maybe if you tell him you can't do it, it's halacha. There'd be an example of someone who feels damaged. You're telling me, even though spiritually I can't just say it once. When God speaks to, it shows who he loves. He says, Avraham, Avraham. You have to say it twice. He says, I have to do it this way, and yet you can't. If you tell him you can't, so it's going to hurt him. That's what Rav Kook is speaking about, I think. He's not advocating antinomianism. Antinomianism is a term that means undermining of the law, not following the law. Like with Christianity, antinomianism, they say you don't need to observe the law. And we have people who have been antinomian. The Reform movement was antinomian. And we've had occasionally in the Hasidic world, there's certain Hasidic teachers who had antinomian tendencies. I'm going to mention, not as a general rule, but occasionally. I'll mention one in a few minutes, actually. No, because Rav Kook never says not to observe a law. He never says that we go beyond the law. He never says that the Rogachover, I've already mentioned the famous Rogachover. He had an antinomian streak. We all know, I mean, if you listen to my classes, he learned Torah when he was an Avel, when he was a mourner, which is absolutely forbidden. He would learn Torah on Tisha B'Av. And when he was asked about this, because it's an Avera, you're not allowed to learn Torah, he says, the Torah is worth it. In other words, he'll take the onesh. If there's an onesh, if God's going to punish him, it's okay. The Torah is worth it. It was worth studying Torah, even if he's going to be punished. So that's antinomian. That the Chazon Ish, supposedly, it's recorded, was told about this, and he was very negative because you can't determine what laws you're going to follow. But that's an example of pious antinomianism, but not of this where it actually moves into practice. That Rav Kook's not like this. Rav Kook expresses in a theoretical sense how difficult it is sometimes for the tzaddikim to join with the community. But he says that they must heroically join with the rest of the community to follow all the mitzvot, even to the smallest details, even if it's troubling for the great tzaddik that he has to remove himself, let's say, from his spiritual connections to God, his mysticism, because it's time for a shacharis. You got to do that. Don't we read in Pesach? Rabbi Akiva and the rest of them were certainly involved in great Torah learning, but the students said to him, enough. You got to daven too. You can't just say we're learning and that's enough. So what is the damage? As I said, the damage in quotes is that these tzaddikim, if they had their way, they would serve God in their own fashion. But since they're part of a community, they have to live with everyone else, and their natural spirituality has to be replaced or tempered, I guess, with commanded service. Rav Kook says as follows. Listen to these words. When the great person brings himself too fully into the measure of halakhic details, he shrinks and his stature is diminished. So we see that the great tzaddikim, it's hard for them to get involved in details, pratim, especially someone like Rav Kook, whose spirit soared. But nevertheless, they have to do that. They're required to do that, but it's difficult. So that's worthwhile pointing out. And we see Rav Kook is not like Rav Soloveitchik. For Rav Soloveitchik, I mean, everything, the halakhic details give you the essence. That's what makes you. He wanted to create a whole philosophy out of halakha. But Rav Kook is not like this. We already saw Rav Kook is more a Godic man, and we could see that the halakhic details go into the nitty gritty. They become problematic for the spiritual personality, but he has to overcome it. That's the lesson. But Rav Kook is telling you that it is a problem. Um, listen to this. There are great men whose spiritual level is so exalted that from their standpoint, if the entire world was at their level, the mitzvos would be abolished. Just like will happen in future days, in the days of Mashiach or the resurrection. There is this tradition in the future, whatever that means, the mitzvos will be abolished. And Rav Kook says that, at least in theory, if the whole world was like that, we wouldn't need mitzvos because everyone would be so connected to God. Here, mitzvos are understood here as for everyone, not for the special people who don't really need mitzvos because they're so connected to God. But then he says, despite this, they are very attached to the mitzvos, not for their own sake, but for the sake of the world as a whole, which is tied to them. And he says, when they come to the details of the mitzvot, they find internal contradictions. But if they involve themselves with the details of mitzvahs for the sake of the world, holiness throws on them, is thrown upon them. So what this means is that the great tzaddikim, even if it's difficult for them to be involved in the little nitty gritty, they do it because they're part of Klal Yisrael, and that then raises their feelings, and they'll be overcome these feelings of difficulty they have. It's a striking passage, though, I think, because it describes how certain tzaddikim will not feel an attachment to all the details of the mitzvah, which we're taught we have to be involved in every little detail. Nothing is too small for our attention. And Rav Kook is not saying we don't follow them, but to understand that for some people of high spiritual attainment, this is something that is troubling for them. And we'll get more explanation for that later. I think of a parallel to this in the work of, I think it's a parallel. You can let me know what you think, in the work of the Ishbitzer, Rav Mordechai Yosef of Ishbitz. Now, the Ishbitzer has many antinomian type passages, which I'm not even going to read you one of the famous ones, which he has. And the Ishbitz is known as maybe a subversive Hasidic thinker. He was problematic. Reb Shlomo Carlebach was very influenced by the Ishbitzer. But the Radziner dynasty comes out of Ishbitz. But let me tell you what he says. I think he's really saying the same thing Rav Kook is saying, and you can find a number of Hasidic, you find Rav Tzadok, you find people in the Hasidic world who express himself this way. I don't know of any Litvish Rosh Yeshiva who could ever express himself this way, ever dream of expressing himself the way Rav Kook does. But if you look in the Mehashiloach, the end of Vayera, he's commenting on the passage at the end after the Akedah, and what's the difference in Yiras Elokim? Because God says that after Avraham went through with this, with Keres Yitzhak, he knows that he is Yirei Elokim. So what's the difference in Yirei Elokim and Yirei Hashem? And listen to what he says. He says that Yiras Hashem, fear of God, that's if someone knows that, at least in theory, for him, mutar lo asos hadavar hazeh, that really he can do this thing. It's not going to affect him negatively because his soul is pure. But he doesn't do it. Why? Rak she'asar lo mitzad Hashem yisbarach. He could do this, and it won't affect him negatively, but he won't do it because God says not to. Why? Ki Hashem yisbarach tziva pekudi mishar mechol nefesh. God has commanded it. Listen to this though. There are the average person. There are people who are not at the level of the tzaddik, that they still need these mitzvos. Because if it was just the tzaddikim in the world who are at that level, you wouldn't need these commandments, because they don't need the commandments. Whatever the commandment is supposed to accomplish, they're already there. But since the world is not at that level, therefore you need these commandments. And what does the Yarei Hashem do? Ha'adam mechuyav lispol isur avor chavero. That is the zosi karei yiras Hashem. The tzaddik, he has to mechuyav lispol. He has to suffer iser, that this is prohibited. Why? Avor chavero, because of his neighbor. In other words, there are some people who don't need this law or that law. He doesn't say which laws. They could achieve whatever God wants us to achieve without that. But the rest of the world is not at that level. So it's commanded. And such a person follows the command, even though in his mind he knows he doesn't need it. He does it. He suffers. That's the language. I mean, that's something like the Ishbitzer would say. He uses the very word is provocative, lispol. He could have used another term. But the Ishbitzer has all sorts of interesting ideas. The most famous one, of course, is what he says about Pinchas and Zimri. If you look in the Torah, Zimri's a bad guy doing the sin, and Pinchas, Kanayim Pogimbo, has to take him out. But according to the Ishbitzer, Pinchas was, he didn't realize that Zimri was at a much higher level. And that Zimri was, God was sort of compelling Zimri to do this. And so he was like a nar, he says, that Pinchas was only acting according to like the written law. But he didn't understand that there's a higher law. And that was what Zimri and Cosby. Zimri was doing with Cosby. Now, this completely overturns not just the pasuk; it overturns all of rabbinic literature and understanding, I think, until the 19th century. But that's the Ishbitzer. The Ishbitzer could come up with all sorts of new ways of reading things. So I discussed in the chapter. I give a number of examples of where this theme of the difficulty of the particulars. In fact, Rav Kook goes on to say that there's the damage, the stress on particulars has a damage in another way, because you have to join the particulars. When I say particulars, think of all to observe Shabbos in accordance the way it's supposed to be, like a Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa tells you, with all the particulars of everything and mitzvot and all the lots of different laws and ramifications of these laws. The problem is you can then end up focusing on the laws for the sake of the laws without seeing any higher telos. It just becomes sort of behaviorism, no spirituality at all. I think sometimes maybe people at the Seder, for instance, they're so concerned about the shiurim, you're measuring how big the lettuce is and all that, you lose the forest for the trees. The whole point of the Seder is the lettuce needs to be a certain size, but that's just because that's the mitzvah. It's the Seder is supposed to think about important matters. You're not supposed to be focused on the details of the lettuce. Rav Soloveitchik once he joked about this, that if we had a Christmas tree, he said they're always shiurim. How tall does it have to be? Can it be plastic, or does that? He actually used the word Christmas tree. He spoke about that, and that's the halacha, of course. But you can't lose sight of the forest for the trees. And Rav Kook says that because of the emphasis on details without any connection to inner spiritual development, Judaism did suffer a decay. And this decay allowed Christianity to spread, because Christianity was able to focus on its opposition to law and point to what, to a certain extent, was true, that it had become behaviorism and was lacking in spirituality. And that's a problem. It doesn't mean Christianity is right. Of course it's wrong, but it's an example of what happens when you don't keep the spirituality there. Heschel has a famous line. He said it about the Litvaks. He said the way it's quoted, he says it's the Orthodox, but it's the Hasidim are also Orthodox. He means the non-Hasidic Orthodox. He said that the Orthodox are not in awe of God; they're in awe of the Shulchan Aruch. That is the typical Orthodox Jew, learned Orthodox Jew. Is there any discussion about God? Everything's about the Shulchan Aruch, the laws. And Heschel was reflecting a more Hasidic perspective, where, of course, you follow the laws, but that's, there's things that are more important than that. The connection with the Eibishter, and in the Hasidic world, you don't have this focus. First of all, you don't have this focus on the law, the details of the law. Rav Amital writes about this as well. Growing up, he never had that, and also you don't have what Chaim Soloveitchik wrote about in Rupture and Reconstruction, because the Hasidic world has a tradition. They follow their tradition. The idea that all of a sudden, like we have in the non-Hasidic world, things we've been doing for generations, now all of a sudden, because of the written sources, we're going to change everything and new standards. You can't do that in the Hasidic world. The Hasidic world follows the tradition, the way it's done. I remember when they came out with the idea, which didn't really take off as far as I know, but they made a big push for this. The OU and others, that on your shops you need to have ashkachas. Yes, or Moshe Feinstein said you don't need, the sherry cask, you don't have to worry about it. And they pushed it, and then as far as I know, it didn't really succeed in most shows. Correct me if I'm wrong. The shows I know didn't go along with it, and they don't feel you need to have an OU on the schnapps. But I remember it was a big deal. Jewish Action published a whole article saying that giving both sides of the dispute, and then saying you should consult your local Orthodox rabbi. And I heard from a member of the Moshe Feinstein's family, because I was at a wedding with him after that, and he said it was a big chutzpah. Ramosha says you can drink it, and you're supposed to ask your local Orthodox rabbi. Like, what's your local Orthodox rabbi supposed to do? He's going to tell Ramosha he's wrong. I mean, so. But you did have in many shuls, they got rid of the regular schnapps, and you had with Litvisha poskim who said we can't drink this anymore. Ramosha was just giving us a kula, or we don't accept Ramosha, whatever it is. But in the Hasidic world, think what this would mean. If you saw the Rebbe drink this, you're now going to say that it's not good enough for me? If the Rebbe drank it, if the Rebbe drank it, of course it's good enough for me. So the Hasidim, it's much harder to get them to change their practices because they have this spiritual connection to the Rebbe that in the Litvish world, okay, so this is how we used to do it under Ramosha. Now the Rav Yoshev is the Posek Ador, we change it, and now we follow Rav Yoshev. You can't really do that in the Hasidic world because they're not really led by poskim. They're led by Rebbes, spiritual leaders, and so it's a different circumstance. And Rav Kook, as we've said, is very much influenced by Hasidus. In fact, I would go so far as to say that he functioned as a Hasidic Rebbe to a large extent. If you've read the descriptions of his Shalashudis and how people related to him as an Ish Kadosh, he really functioned as like a Hasidic Rebbe to a large extent. Okay, let's move on. But the stress, though, he is not a practical antinomian, but he explains the problems, the difficulties. He has some other, again, the word I could say is provocative comments that I quote just before we end this chapter. So, for instance, he says that many Torah scholars have chosen, as he says, to focus on matters that are not dangerous, but not of much benefit. What does that mean, not of much benefit? He gives examples. He says they focus only on halacha, on drashos, and pilpul. What's neat, that's fine, and that's important. But what Rav Kook's point is that in this era, this very important era that we're in, which is the era of the end of the 19th, early 20th century, is very different than previous eras. We need the Gedolim to be spiritual figures also. The Jewish people is looking for something more. Many people are leaving traditional Judaism. And you can't be a leader, a spiritual leader, if all you can be is the same way that someone 200 years ago in Vilna or Warsaw was. You need more than that. And he obviously valued all these things, halacha, drashos, etc. But he says that the great spiritual leaders are in a slumber. They need to wake up. He woke up. He understands that the new generations needs guidance, but they haven't woken up. He even says, in discussing these great spiritual leaders, he says as follows. He says that certain special tzaddikim don't even, because of their high status and what they're doing, they only need to daven or study occasionally. That is, in theory, again, this gets back to what I said before, that they would not need tefillah is derabanan. It's been established that we have to do it 3 times a day. But the point I mentioned, I don't need to go into it again. Also, let me share with you a couple other things. No, okay, we covered pretty much what I wanted to tell you. The last important point in this chapter, which I discuss on page 22, is Rav Kook says something else very interesting. He says that when you think about all these particulars A lot of these are actually humros. When I say humrot, I don't even mean humrot. If it's in the Gemara, it's not a humrah. That's already a rabbinic law. But we have, from the time of the closing of the Gemara until today, we have many practices that developed. We have disputes, and we have chumras. And some of these chumras are now accepted as basic law. Some minhagim, which are really chumras, became accepted as basic laws. And Rav Kook says that many of these chumras were important in the exile to protect the Torah. We needed these chumras because of the circumstances we were in. And also he says that many chumras arose, many stringencies, because there was a doubt what the halacha is. We don't know what the halacha is, especially if it's a Torah matter. We're not sure what it should be. So we go, the principle is you just follow the strict opinion if you're not sure. Rav Kook says, however, but in the future, we're going to have prophets. We'll be in the land of Israel. And I already told you last class that prophets, according to Rav Kook, in the land of Israel, prophets can have a role in Jewish law. We'll also have a Sanhedrin. And we're going to talk in detail of how he envisions Sanhedrin. And we will not have these chumras anymore. These chumras are going to be abolished. We won't have the chumras of doubt as to halacha, because the Sanhedrin or the prophet will tell us what the halacha is. And all the chumras that were added on in the exile will no longer be necessary. In fact, as we'll see, Rav Kook even says we're not going to be bound to the Bavli, Talmud Bavli, but we'll get to that. But Rav Kook adds that doesn't mean there won't be humrot. There will be stringencies, but these will be stringencies suitable for a redeemed people in their land. There will always be humrot. The problem is that living as a redeemed people in their own land, running their own affairs, every chumrah, let's say from Vilna or Warsaw or Krakow from 300 years ago, or mentioned by Ramosh Isserles, is not necessarily suitable for our life. Now, it might not be suitable for our life today, but as we'll see in a future class, we do not have a mechanism to update Jewish law. That's part of the problem. We'll give some examples of things that if a Sanhedrin was here, they could change it, but we don't have a mechanism for that. But if there is a future Sanhedrin or prophecy, then you can imagine things being changed, but it's not only going to be Lakula. There'll be things Lachumra. By the way, you can come up even without a Sanhedrin. I can come up with all sorts of chumras. I'll give you a perfect example. Sneakers on Tisha B'Av. The whole reason you can't wear leather on Tisha B'Av is because we're supposed to feel the pain, and the only shoes that were comfortable were leather. The only shoes they had were leather shoes. So they said you can't wear leather. So people went barefoot. So now we come up with all the shoes we have, our feet are not at all uncomfortable. So if there was a Sanhedrin today, you can imagine a Sanhedrin saying that it's not about leather per se, that any sneakers that make you feel comfortable, or wine, stam yenam. That's really not really relevant today. Assimilation doesn't come about because of wine drinking. You could think beer, which originally they tried, but it wasn't accepted. Today, I think, or even Coca-Cola. I mean, you can come up with things that are much more relevant, perhaps, but we don't have the mechanism. But a future Sanhedrin, a future prophet, they could update Jewish law in a way that would be more suitable, perhaps. At least that's what Rav Kook says. Okay, that's chapter 2. Chapter 3, the title of chapter 3 is The Need for Broad... I couldn't come up with a good title. Couldn't come up with a clickbait title, so it's a bit of a long title, but okay. The Need for Broad Jewish Philosophical Knowledge and the Dangers of a Limited Curriculum. A little bit long for a title, but it gives us an idea of what I'm going to speak about. And Rav Kook, I begin with something amazing that Rav Kook says. Rav Kook says that when you're deciding Jewish law, if you've probably heard the expression maybe that to decide leniently, you need big shoulders. I don't know where that, I guess it's a Yiddish expression that what it means is that, look, any rabbi asked a question could rule stringently. That doesn't take difficulty. To rule leniently, then you need the broad shoulders, then you need the knowledge, you need the courage, obviously, but you need the knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge, you're not going to feel comfortable in your ability to rule leniently, so you're going to be strict. So if you don't properly understand the halacha, you're going to be led to stringency, excessive stringency. And Rav Kook says the same thing happens when it comes to matters of Jewish thought. Even you take someone, Rav Kook says, even if he has great halakha, or she has, well, that's a little anachronistic to say she. Today you'd say she, but in his day it was all he. Even if one had great halachic knowledge, if he does not have an understanding of Jewish philosophical knowledge, then Rav Kook says he's to be regarded as one of the hamonam, one of the masses in this area. In other words, you have a great Talmud Chacham, a great Talmudist, but he doesn't know the Rambam or Nevuchim. He doesn't know Yehuda Levi. He doesn't know Chasdei Kreskas. He doesn't know Ralbag. He doesn't know the whole tradition of Jewish philosophical thought. Just like you wouldn't decide a question of Jewish law and Hilchos Shabbos if you didn't know Tractate Shabbos, if you didn't know the Rambam, you didn't know Shulchan Aruch, you didn't know the important commentaries. How could you paskin a shayla on Hilchos Shabbos? You couldn't. So Rav Kook says you also cannot intelligently express yourself on Jewish theological matters if you don't have the equivalent knowledge of the non-halakhic tradition, the philosophical tradition, the Jewish intellectual tradition. Now, it might strike you as obvious to say it, but by saying it, he is basically removing almost all the traditional Torah scholars, because the typical traditional Torah scholar doesn't have any knowledge of these areas. So, Rav Kook is saying that it's a problem. Why? And he gives an example. He says that such a person, if you don't have real knowledge, Jewish philosophical knowledge, you will be machmir, put machmir in quotes maybe, when it comes to matters of Jewish belief. Just like if you don't have halakhic knowledge, you're going to be machmir in Hilchos Shabbos. You will take an idea comes across, and all you know is, let's say, what the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. You don't know the Ralbag, you don't know Kreskas, you don't know the Milmar Nevuchim, you don't know Sadia Gaon and Mos Deos, and therefore immediately it strikes you as a little bit new and novel, and you're going to say that's a forbidden idea. We have to reject that idea. You can't hold that idea. You're going to be machmir in the areas of emunah, of belief. And not only that, some people will go so far because of their lack of knowledge of the Jewish philosophical tradition. They'll even go so far as to say that certain ideas are heretical. They go against our tradition and they're heresies, and the person holding it is a heretic. And Rav Kook says this is creating an enormous problem. What's the problem? So he says, Jews who are educated in modern schools, who know modern science, they are going to be led to heresy from these rabbis. How can they be led to heresy from these rabbis? These rabbis are the ones fighting against heresy. These rabbis are the ones saying that all these new philosophical ideas are heretical and you can't hold it. But Rav Kook explains that the assumption that all currently accepted beliefs are a principle of the Torah will turn those off. Turn people off when they come to see that some of what people believed in the past is incorrect. These people these rabbis who don't have broad philosophical knowledge won't be able to distinguish between beliefs which are ikarei emunah, basic to the faith, and beliefs that, with the acquisition of new knowledge, they can be abandoned. Instead of understanding this, they insist on the infallibility of all sorts of beliefs, even beliefs that are not basic to the faith. So the younger generation, which is educated, now Rav Kook doesn't say what he's referring to here, but he's clearly referring to matters of science, evolution, etc. So they come to a belief about a certain matter, and the rabbis tell them that to believe this is heresy. But their attitude is, but wait a second, but this is true. We're convinced of this, but this is heresy, the rabbis say. Okay, so if now I'm a heretic, what do I need to observe Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, eat kosher? I'm already a heretic. He's told me I'm a heretic. If these rabbis, however, had a broader understanding, they would recognize that not everything they think is a fundamental of the faith is a fundamental of the faith. And they would know how to distinguish between principles of faith and other traditional beliefs, which are not fundamentals and can be rejected. And he's clearly referring to matters of science and evolution. And we saw this play out in real time. Those who remember about, 15 years ago, you had this rabbi. He spoke in Torah in Motion a couple of times. Nosson, he was called then. Today he's called Natan Sifkin. So he publishes a book, and he says, first of all, that this idea that the world is almost 5,786 years old. That we'll see what Rav Kook has to say about that next class. That, but that doesn't, we don't need to accept that at all. There's dinosaurs, there's history, etc. And he also said that when Chazal spoke about matters of science, they were not infallible. And I don't know why anyone would think that there's such a thing as infallibility. We're doing Daf Yomi now, Maseches Harayos. In yeshivas, they call it Horios. The whole Masechta is about even the Sanhedrin making a mistake. So if the Sanhedrin can make a mistake, certainly I would assume that, the local Gadol can make a mistake. But he said that, and not just the local, sorry, not the local Gadol, if the Sanhedrin can make a mistake, then rabbis in the Talmud can make a mistake. So he says that the rabbis speaking scientifically, they could be wrong. And he was interested to how that affected the halacha. And the response in part of the Haredi world, the leading part of the Haredi world, was such that his books were put in cherem, and it was called heresy. Now, I've heard, it would be nice if someone did a study on this. Apparently, there are people in the Haredi world who actually were led to heresy based upon what happened, and we can understand this through Rav Kook, because apparently in the Haredi world there are people who said that if this really is what I'm obligated to believe, and I can't believe it, and if I don't believe it, I'm a heretic, then this is I can't be part of this community. I can't be. I don't know how many became heretics and threw everything out. I think many of them probably decided to leave the Haredi world to a more open left-wing Haredi or modern Orthodox. I don't know, but that's what Rav Kook is speaking about. That even great rabbis can just make these statements, and fortunately in our communities we don't have these obligatory beliefs. But you're going to go around, you're going to go into our schools and tell everyone that when the rabbis of the Talmud speak about spontaneous generation, you must believe that happens, that there's spontaneous generation, or that you must believe that there were never civilization 20,000 years ago, or you never had I mean, these are the sorts of dinosaurs. These are the sorts of things that if this became the doctrine of all traditional Orthodox Judaism, like let's say it was like a fundamentalist Christian type group, I think everyone listening to us right now would have to check out, because when would be in a community where intellectually we feel we can't be honest and open about it. So that's what Rav Kook is speaking about. And the key is that you need to know what is an Ikar Emunah and what is not an Ikar Emunah. He says, he has a great passage. I quote it from it's in Shmona Kvatzim. Faith beyond the proper measure debilitates the world. That is, you can't just make all these grand statements and say you have to believe it on faith. We have to have faith. But if you ask people to believe in things which are just literally unbelievable and say accept it on faith, that's going to be the end of Judaism, because then you can tell people to believe anything, and it doesn't work like this way. Rav Kaffa, the great Rav Yosef Kaffa of the eminent interpreter of the Rambam, he makes a very important point. At the beginning of the Rambam's, in the Mishnah Torah, in Yesodei Torah, where the Rambam presents a Ptolemaic view of astronomy. That is, that the sun revolves around the earth. Rav Kaffa says that it's important to recognize that the Rambam included this in the Mishnah Torah, but it has its origin in Greek science. The Rambam's whole understanding of astronomy is based on the Greeks, because if you're going to assume that this is actually Torah truth, after all, it's in Yesodei Torah, in the Mishnah Torah, and we know that this is mistaken today. Well, if this is regarded as Torah truth from Sinai, and we see it's mistaken, well, this will lead people then to reject every other thing that we're told comes from Sinai. So Rav Kafach says it's vital. Same thing Rav Kook says, to distinguish what is Sinai, Torah, authentic, and what is just something which isn't. It was a belief, and now we know better, so we reject it. It's dangerous to have this broad tent and say that this is all from Sinai, Torah, truth, etc. Yaakov Kamenetsky understood this well. In fact, he raises the question, when you read that chapter in Yesodei Torah where the Rambam deals with science, he thinks you don't say Birkas Torah on that because it's really not Torah. It's the Rambam's understanding of the world, which he's giving you to fulfill the mitzvah of, can you understand God, you understand the world, then, that for the Rambam is very important. That's how you learn to love God, by appreciating the world. So the concept is correct. You need to know science to fulfill the mitzvah of Hata Hashem Elokecha. Because how do we know we love God? It's an intellectual understanding, intellectual love. We see the wonders of the world, and then we're led into wonderment of God's great creation. So that idea is great. Rav Yaakov agrees with the idea. However, the example the Rambam gave, it just happens to be wrong because the Rambam gave the wrong astronomy. So we have to put a different astronomy in, the more correct astronomy. So we have more to say about this. And then we're going to move in, very long chapter. What is I call it Torah, History, and Science. And it's really some fascinating stuff, and we'll see contemporary implications as well. So we'll stop here. I see it's already 9:27, so we'll stop here. I'll take some of the questions and comments. Oh, and this will be, we'll pick up, God willing, in Tufshin Pei Vav, because Rosh Hashanah will be next week. Let me see what some of the comments are here. I will put in my email address now, and anyone can email me. And hold on, where is it? Oh, here it is. Oh, sorry. And I will get you. Okay, so let me see. Just a couple of questions we had here, a couple of comments. Not that much. We had Janine, you say he's thinking about himself. He is thinking about himself. Rav Kook always, he speaks about the tzaddikim, and they have trouble doing this. I mean, he's speaking about himself. He includes himself in this. He does, sometimes he does say himself, but usually he speaks in the third person. But he definitely is including himself in all these things. Absolutely. You ask, and didn't the Avos worship God? Yes, the Avos did worship God this way. So, but the Rambam explains why we needed to institute tefillah. Why do we need to have a fixed formula? Why can't everyone just worship the way they wanted? It wasn't just the Avos; it was after that as well. But the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah saw that they needed to formulate it. If everyone was at the level of the great tzaddikim, they wouldn't need it. So it's a struggle. It's a struggle. We have to, when you say the same things every day, how to, they say Rav Kook, by the way, Rav Zal Meltzer says that if only my Ne'ilah was at the level of Rav Kook's Mincha. Rav Kook was one of those people who every davening was able to be the way. For us, hopefully at Yomim Noraim, we're able to reach a certain level, but generally it's rote, and that has value also. I'm not even going to say, like, maybe this is my heresy, but I don't believe that every davening needs to be at a super high level when you need to be spiritually connected. I think that's sort of impossible. It's part of our lifestyle that we do it, and that's important. It grounds us, but sometimes it should be on special occasions. We should try to reach for it. But so you need to have it formulated. There's a video of Rav Hershel Schachter online. There's some guy, I think it was a YU guy, who was doing something with teenagers and davening, because we have in all our schools, they have davening in the morning, and with the students. And he asked for Schechter, he says, some of the students don't want to daven. And I can tell you from my kids' school, not all the kids want to daven, some are religious, but of course they force them to, which you can imagine how the result of that is. And Rav Schachter says, the guy is shocked, as I recall. He asks him, some people don't want to daven, or Schachter says, so why do you have to daven then? He says, what do you mean? He says, well, if they don't, and then Rav Schachter says, okay, you have them, I think he says, say Ashrei and Shema Esrei, and that's it. Don't force them to daven. I don't know whether you force them, you allow them to sit there, because if they sit there and not doing anything, that's the problem for the others. But here, the Rav Schachter himself said, if the kids don't want to daven, don't force them to daven. And he himself has said that sometimes, the Chazan's davening too fast for him, so he skips things. He does certain things. So this idea, I don't know how that would work. We might have some people who teach in high schools. I don't know exactly how you do that because you say I don't think we can make davening voluntary. And do you say then, okay, well, everyone has to have davening, but those people who don't want to daven will just say Shema and Shema Esrei, and then you go off and you can do recess. I mean, I don't know how that would work in practice, but I think we do need to bear in mind what this means when we force people to daven, even teenagers. I mean, um, teenagers, that's such an important time, and then they're going to leave, and then they go to college, and we want them to come to Minyan when they get to college. This will be the first time when they don't have their parents there, and they can do what they want. And many of them, as soon as they get to college, you don't see them again. And they were turned off in those years. So, and I'm sure some of this turning off is forcing them to do something they don't want to do. So, but I'm not sure how to solve that problem. But now, Joseph, you asked what conditions Rav Kook think needed to happen before there can be a basin that can make the sort of changes he envisioned. We're going to deal with this in a future class because not only does Rav Kook answer your question, Rav Kook imagines a future Sanhedrin, which presumably he'll be a part of, and it's okay to think he'd be a part of it. Ramosha Feinstein, it's recorded that he thought that he'd be a part. He was very concerned about not developing a mum because he thought there'd be a Sanhedrin, Mashiach would come and he'd be put on the Sanhedrin. I mean, he knew that he was the great Torah scholar of the age. Rav Kook is going to explain not just what the future Sanhedrin can do, but how it does it. He provides the drushas that will bring about different things that he thinks will happen. And Rabbi Kelman says, episode 3 of our New Delhi podcast, and one of the slichos has just been posted. And I would say that slichos, I'm not going tonight because it's right. I won't get there in time. Although it's actually at 10, so maybe I will. In fact, I'm looking right at someone who I don't know if I'm going to see him at the slichos, but sometimes he sits right behind me in shul. So if I'm not there on time, he can tell me. But we have slichos tonight at 10. Last night was 9:30. Slichos are a problem. They're hard. They're difficult. We don't understand what they mean. And so now that Torah in Motion is explaining some of them, that'll help us in that. Just like we, for Kinos, we've spoken about this many times before, but I repeat it because I don't know. We have new people all the time. That when I was growing up, we'd sit there and we just hours do keynotes all in Hebrew. No one knew what was going on, and it was what's happening. And somehow they figured out, maybe 20 some years ago, that let's explain it. I mean, the Rav used to explain it, but in every shul now they don't do all the slichos. The keynotes. They pick a few keynotes. The rabbi explains it to make it meaningful. And I think that's the way it should be. Is it a reform? Yes, it's a reform, but it's a reform with a small r. I don't see anyone complaining that because we have an old rabbinic expression: a little bit with kavana is better than a lot without kavana. So I don't see any more comments and questions. And actually, I can. I don't know if Rabbi Kalman, you want to
Yeah,
say something? I have time now
I
to
will
make
say the
my show
slichot are
for
beautiful.
keynotes.
I decided like
Maybe
last week.
slichos, yeah.
I told my son I think I want to do a podcast on slichot because I don't understand one word of the slichot. So for me to understand it, and the only way I can understand is if I teach it. So I mean, that's only a slight exaggeration. And so I decided. So we're doing one a day. I did the first one. That's exactly how I began. Why can't we do slichot like our keynote? You know, Rav Hutner's quip. I often quote. I don't know if I quoted so much. I know it's the slichot. Rav Hutner, the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Aleph. Siman Aleph. The first chapter in the Shulchan Aruch says Tov Ma'at im kavana me harbe beli kavana. Better a little, as Marc just said, with kavana than law with us. So Rav Hutner quipped, Tov Ma'at beli kavana me harbe beli kavana. And that's better a little without kavana than a lot without kavana. So hopefully, if anybody wants to benefit, the idea was to make it 10 minutes a night. The first one was an introduction, was a little bit longer. The second one also, I was talking to my son, said, you've been going on for 20 minutes. I said, oh my God, I didn't realize. So the last two that I recorded already are a little bit shorter. And the idea is to release one, take one of the slicha from that particular day. I know they're different, hugging which one, but whatever. One from that day and to try to explain it. Anyways, that's if I can put in a
Yeah,
little.
I look when I do the sichos, I like to look in the English because the sichos is not like a bracha
But they're
where you just
beautiful.
recite the
They're
Hebrew.
they're
What's
they're like
the
it's poetry, like all poetry. It's like
yeah?
they're really beautifully done, and that you understand them, and they're not as hard as you might think. I mean, it depends which ones. Some are harder than others, but if you pay attention, if you look through it, I have a little bit of a safer that helps to explain a little bit, and I think a little bit, and I read it over 10 times. And anyway, so I've
But
got
it's amazing. They wrote it. They were look. The people in medieval times were also average people, just like us. Other than that,
right, of
but they
course,
wanted the average people to try to raise themselves to appreciate. It's like It's poetry
it is
to be
poetry.
moved
It
by
is
it.
poetry.
And if you read the Hebrew, like I was sometimes like Avraham is referred to as Eitan and all, you get a sense for the Hebrew and the illusions. The illusions in the Seichos are great.
Correct.
And yeah. Okay,
Anyways,
very
that's
good.
it. If anybody wants, I'd be if anybody wants, nobody else listen, of course, obviously. But if anybody listens, I'd be very interested to get any feedback. The part other stuff. This is a little bit. I'm not aware of anybody else who does this. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to have competition, but I don't know. So I'm being interested to hear any feedback people might have. Of course. Anyways, okay. Tomorrow, I missed most of the class. As you know, I just caught the last minute. Davening is a big issue, and I teach in a high school where davening, of course, is voluntary. I teach probably the only high school in North America where davening is 100% voluntary at Chat, Tanamam Chat, as a community school for all kinds of reasons. But the minyan is beautiful because it's voluntary. It really is a beautiful minyan. It's small, but it's beautiful. And davening is a big problem as much for the adults as it's for kids. It's not a teenage problem. The teenage, it's a problem. It's hard, but that's what I talk about my share every Friday. But I'm putting in too much plugs for myself here this morning. I'm sorry,
No, but I think as adults, even if you're not in the mood to daven, this is what we have to do. You're more
right.
mature.
But yeah,
Sometimes
so
the
they come
younger
late and they
people,
don't
they
pay
throw it
attention and
off.
they
And once
talk.
they throw it off, you can't
Right.
get them back.
Yeah, Rav Schechter, yeah, I heard him say it from Shir. Yeah, absolutely. Don't force kids to daven, and you don't have to daven so much. The Rambam right once a day, a little bit. What's the big deal? And everybody else disagrees, says you don't even have to daven. I mean, I know
Yeah.
rabbinically, halachically, but strictly speaking, most Rishonim are the opinion there's no obligation to pray. The Ramban says it's an act of chesed. God allows us to pray. God gives us the opportunity to ask Him for things. You don't have to pray if you don't want to. Of course, I understand rabbinically the halacha didn't develop that way, but conceptually it's true. And I think what Rav Shachter is saying is sometimes let the halacha be al pi din. You don't have to worry about every Mishnah
Well,
Berurah.
I don't know. He's saying that you don't have to halacha. You don't need to say
It's
all
not
the
going to
Shemona
work.
Zimra.
It's going to be
He says you do
counterproductive.
Shema and Shemona
Right.
Esrei.
Okay.
He didn't go to the
Oh,
extent of saying, well, don't daven, at least to there,
okay.
don't daven at all. He says, so, because he's assuming the
Okay.
teenager, it's okay. He'll daven the Shemona Esrei. If
Psuket Zimra is a midat chasidut. He would say it all the time in Shir. Psuket Zimra is not
yeah.
even a minhag. And for sure you can skip it. And if it's too hard, you can only concentrate for 15 minutes. So skip Psuket Zimra. Okay, go to Slichas. Early Slichas, because
Yes.
that's the way the world works. Nobody waits till Chatzot today. Oh boy.
Well, it's
Okay.
only the first night,
No,
but
no,
I'm not waking up at
there's
5
no
a.m.
different. No, no,
tomorrow.
that's just what
So,
people did. It's not true, but
yeah,
it's. I get it. I
yeah,
get it. I
yeah,
also went early. What can you do?
yeah.
Okay, Lila Tov, everybody. Rabbi Shumai, we have, I think, 7 more classes a week. Every day, Torah learning. Of course, our Yom Kippur, Yom Yun in 2 weeks. For those who were there yesterday for Rosh Hashanah Yom, it was really, really a fantastic program. But I don't say so myself. I didn't teach, so I can say that. But our 6 teachers were wonderful. Okay, everybody. Lila Tov, let's hear good news and. All good things. And we look forward to learning. Of course, Marc will be back. Dr. Shapiro will be back in 2 weeks. Obviously, next week, we want to wish everybody Shana Tova, Ktiva V'Chatima Tova, all the best. And during a certain...
Rabbi Kelman, before you
Yes.
finish, may I just wrote something quickly. Listening to Dr. Shapiro, there is, it's not an official trend, but I've noticed that in the Haredi communities in the U.S., there is a trend now for children who years ago would have to go to shul every single week, especially boys. There's a trend now that if the child doesn't feel ready, doesn't want to, he stays home and does whatever he does, with helps his mom or sleeps. So this is something interesting, taking into account, I think, the development of, individual children.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've seen it in my own eyes.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see if it works. Hopefully, everyone is struggling to try to get.
Yeah.
There's so much static out there, and so many competing things. We want. Ramosha Feinstein said that the biggest problem is that Judaism became the yoke. People would say how difficult it is to be a Jew.
Right.
You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say how wonderful it is to be a Jew.
Right.
So you need a lot to do. Chinuch, Rabbi Cheak Weinberg says, to be a good mechanech, is extremely difficult. And being a good mechanech in Crown Heights is not the same thing as in Woodmere, as in Bnei Brak. You need to know your environment.
Okay, off the slichas, doctor.
Yes. Okay.
All
But
right.
I can't close it out. You have to close it
Okay.
out because I was the
Okay, yeah, I'll
host.
close it out. Okay. You're the host still. I have to reclaim host, but no, when you leave,
But I can close it now if you want.
hold on, give me 1 second. I can do it if you let me reclaim host. Not that it matters,
Okay.
really,
So I'm
but
just gonna.
yeah, you can leave. Okay. Lila Tov, everybody. Thank you.